Keeping my glasses dry and my face protected are the #1 goals of living in the snow globe this winter, folks. And it's a lot easier now that I've made some modifications to the way that I build up my rosy bucket cap. And I'm going to share those with you today. The pattern is already on the channel. So let me introduce you or reintroduce you to the rosy pattern. It has a bucket brim or a bucket visor. So the same top for both pieces of headwear. One is a cap and one is a hat. We did this video a couple of years ago on the channel, a video for each, but today I'm just going to show you some improvements I've made. I haven't changed the size of the pattern pieces, but just the techniques of putting them together. So first of all, I'm going to line the back of my lower band with a piece of fleece. So I won't just use the woolen fabric to add some color and contrast. I'm going to use the fleece like a stabilizer, so I'll talk about that. Using that fleece really adds a little bit of extra weight to the hat and some body, and it really makes it feel like a substantial shaped cap, which I love. So I've already cut out the pieces for the cap that I'm going to make today in this video, but you can get your own free pattern following the link in the pinned comment below or in the video description. There's a page on our website that has all the options. We have a couple of paid pattern sets too if you need multiple sizes. Follow those stretch lines. We're going to use fleece as our main fabric. This is a cap and a hat that was designed to be used with polar fleece. Today, what's different is I'm going to do a new way of putting the visor together. So I'm going to add some edge trim, and I'm only going to be working on the right side of the visor. So no turning right side and inside out and trying to do a top stitch once I've finished sewing the visor and making it, a little less attractive because the stabilizer will get all folded. Use a good quality fleece, and if you see some arrows on your pattern pieces showing the stretch, what we mean is that it stretches this way, that you cut in that direction from side to side rather from top to bottom. And I use a two-way stretch fleece normally, and that's what I recommend. You're going to need a source of heat, whether that's an iron or a heat press. So if you're going to use an iron, set it for wool because we're using the Heat and Bond, the light version. And so what we're going to do is we're going to apply Heat and Bond to either the craft foam or the extra firm stabilizer. And boy, we're going to end up with a lovely visor that you can use this technique on any cap in our library of patterns, but we're going to use the rosy today. This is the way that I showed you how to do the rosy a couple of years ago, so I'm going to modify that. You can still do it that way. The pattern works either way, but this time we're going to work all from the right side, and we're going to add that edge. And if you're a quilter, you'll know how to do this already. So if you're using something like the craft foam, that one, I didn't even put fabric underneath. I just trimmed the edge with some velvet to match that beautiful fabric that has velvet embossing. But today I'm going to show you how to build the cap with two pieces of the Heat and Bond, a piece of the extra firm stabilizer, and two pieces of fabric. One is a gray fleece and the other is that pink and gray plaid. So I'm going to apply the Heat and Bond stabilizer on the wrong side of each piece of fabric, and it makes it easier if you can cut them all out at the same time. I didn't, so I may have to trim a little bit of my Heat and Bond away just so I don't end up with glue on my pressing mat. And I'll use my heat press. This is a really nice one. I like the fact that you can set the time and the temperature, but for that first go around, we're putting the paper side up and the glue side down, and we only need about 3 or 4 seconds, and we'll let it cool off. And once it's cooled, we will peel that paper backing away. And on the fleece, the dull side, the side that doesn't have a higher loft, is the side we're going to attach our Heat and Bond to. I haven't had a problem using this weight on the back of fleece before, but if you're using a really thick fleece or a thick woolen material, you may need to go up to the heavyweight Heat and Bond, but this lightweight seems to be working fine for me for the fabrics that I've been using. So I've melted that first layer of glue and I've let my pieces cool. And now you'll see how it looks when you have applied it properly. It'll be a little bit of a glossy but milky color. First I'll trim away that extra, just so that doesn't end up on my wool pressing mat. And it just takes a few seconds of heat to apply that first layer of glue, and that's how it should look like. And we have total adhesion on that one side. And now I'm going to treat this sort of like a sandwich. So my gray fleece is one of my pieces of bread, so to speak, and my extra firm sew-in stabilizer is going to be the ham in between the two pieces of bread. And I'm building from the bottom of the visor up. So my fleece is going to be the under layer of my visor, the one that would just be above my eyes and not visible really to the outside world. And now I'm going to use the temperature and heat settings on my heat press. So 12 seconds at 295 degrees Fahrenheit or 70 Celsius. And I will just do one half at a time and then move over to the other half. And what I'm doing is I'm melting the glue that's on the other side of that stabilizer and on the back of the fleece, so they will become one piece fused together with the adhesive that is the mighty Heat and Bond. So that worked great, and now I will peel off the paper for my plaid, and this is the top of my visor. And I'm going to attach it now to the side of the stabilizer that hasn't been heat and bonded yet. So that sandwich layer in the middle is going to have a layer of heat and bond on each side. And in this case, I'm going to use a piece of scrap cotton as a pressing cloth. And I'll just repeat that heat setting and check to see that, make sure that everything is glued well, and it is. And just like that, with a few easy steps, I have my visor body done. I'm just going to reinforce those edges with an edge stitch on both of the curves, and I'm using my magnetic seam guide to help me there. So my stitch is basically the width of my presser foot on the right side. And I'm just going along the outside edge of my visor, that big long curve, and then the inside curve as well. And that just holds all the layers in place. Even though they're firmly glued together, it just helps because I'm going to be sewing on both of those edges. And I want that fabric to just stay lying flat and never to pucker up if it's even a little bit loose. So I've got my prep done for my visor, and now it's time to add the trim. And this is what I was talking about, folks, with your experience in quilting. We're going to cover that edge with another piece of fabric. And just to see how much you need, I recommend going around the edge with a tape measure. And the size I suggested, if you saw the pattern piece towards the beginning, is 25 inches long or 64 centimeters long, and about 3¼ inches deep or about 8½ centimeters deep. I'm going to fold it in half. So the folded edge is going to be my nice edge that's going to be visible from the outside, and that raw edge that I'm clipping together now, well, that's going to be buried inside of the seams. I will apply this edge with 3 rows of sewing, 2 on one side, and then the third will be the finishing row. Now I'm going to do an edge stitch to sew those 2 raw edges together. You can use a serger to do this step too. I'm going to make this cap though without using my serger, so that people who are on the channel that may not have all this equipment I have, including a serger, can still make this cap and have great results. So I have my edge piece ready to go, and I'm going to leave about 1 inch extra on each end. And since I cut this piece on the bias, it's quite stretchy. I'm going to try not to stretch it out of shape as I'm sewing. It will stretch a little bit though, and that's fine because I want it to lie really flat, sort of the way that it is now as I'm clipping it together. You can see I've left myself a long end, and that end is going to get a little bit longer as I sew around from one tip edge all the way, or tip end all the way around that long curve to the other tip end. And take your time, folks. Again, I'm using my magnetic seam guide and putting those raw edges up against that tall wall of the magnetic seam guide. And this is a new version of my original seam guide, so I'm really pleased. I'll put the link below because it's available everywhere in the world right now. I've always used one like that, very simple, and I love simple and strong. So you can just see how much you need to further reduce the amount of fabric that's going to be able to fold over onto the other side. And I do that with another row of sewing. So this time, rather than an edge stitch, I will go out to my average seam width, or my normal seam width, which is 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. And I'll just go around and do that second row of sewing, just reducing the amount of fabric on the folded side that's going to be able to wrap around the edge of the visor. I want it to be long enough to cover up my sewing, but not too long. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. So I'm just going to clip this over. I'm just checking to make sure that the fold is going to cover the sewing underneath, and it is. And then I'll just sew it in place, working on the back side, the underside. Now you could even use another color or print on your edge. Just have fun, mix and match all sorts of prints and patterns. I did do one with velvet underneath and velvet on the edge and a print on the top, so I'll show you that in a minute, but let's just finish this one. And you can see where my presser foot is. My fabric has wrapped around that edge really nicely. My seam width is not quite a 1/2 inch, just under 1/2 inch, and that turned out to be the best spot. You can see my needle is just inside that folded edge on the right side. And I started at one end and I'm going to go right off the other end. So what I really love about this is it makes the visor a little bit longer and a little bit deeper, but it makes it really crisp and nice too. Those layers of glue really add a lot of body to the visor, and it holds its shape so nicely. And there is a little bit of fiddling to do here at the end. You see that I sewed off the edge with the trim on both tip ends, and now I'm just going to cut them down a little bit so that I can get those raw edges of the very end buried into my seam when I attach this to the band. And I will do some fiddling as I'm sewing too. I can manipulate that raw edge end into the seam as I sew over it. But if you can just sort of straighten it out a little bit, clip away some of the extra fabric before you get started in the step of attaching it to the band of the cap, then that helps. And I've just folded it in half, and I'm making a little notch to mark the center front of my visor. And there it is. It's done. And that is the way that I did it in the first video. So working it on the wrong side, then turning it over on the right side and doing that top stitch, versus this way where I've got a nice crisp finished visor. And here I am putting on this fancy fabric onto some of this craft foam. And craft foam makes a really nice visor too. We've done it in the summer with our sun visor headband. You know, the nice thing about the foam is it floats. So for summer sports, if you're making something with a visor, definitely think about using foam and the heat and bond and a piece of fabric this way, and just finishing off the end. And I didn't even bother putting a piece of fabric underneath. I just used one layer of heat and bond. This one has black velvet underneath and black velvet on the edge. So the underneath pattern is the fabric that I used, or the underneath fabric is what I used for my edge. And just to help straighten it out as you're sewing it onto the band, you can just go and make some clips all the way up to your edge stitch line, 1/4 of an inch in, and that just helps ease it in when you're doing the next steps, which is to actually make it part of your cap. So let's put it together now, and here is what I was saying about using the fleece as a stabilizer. This plaid, this pink and gray plaid, is quite thin. And I think in the first Rosie video, I used it on its own, but now I've found that it makes a really nicer cap if you just stabilize it with a piece of fleece. You can use your regular fleece. You can use micro fleece if your fabric on the other side is thicker than this. So just a couple of layers though for that bottom band, it really makes a difference. And one thing though with fleece, cut on the stretch like this and using 2 pieces of fabric that are stretchy, as they may stretch out of shape. Your feed dog might actually pull it a little bit more than you want. So just check with your pattern piece and trim it to the size of the pattern piece once you're finished doing that. And I did an edge stitch on both of those long edges just to put those 2 pieces together and make them one. And I'll need to do a little bit more trimming just to get the right size for my pattern piece. And then once you have sewn them together, you can start doing your back seams. So with my 3/8 of an inch seam width or 1 centimeter seam width, I'm just sewing those 2 back seam pieces together, the short ends of my long lower band piece. That is my back seam. And I'm going to open up that seam now, and I'm going to sew it flat so that those 2 edges are sewn flat underneath. And I'll just space it out the distance of my presser foot, so I have a nice double top stitch that's visible from the outside and holds it flat on the inside. And that just reduces the feeling of any bulk around your head, especially if you're outside or say in an arena, you're wearing your hat for a long period of time, you want it to be comfortable. And to help too with, depending on your sewing equipment, if sewing through lots of layers is a bit of a problem, then just trim off that extra fabric away from the seam. Careful not to cut through your piece, and just cutting away that excess fabric that you don't need, and just make that nice and flat and comfortable. And now I will do the upper part of our band. You have a choice in this pattern package about whether or not you want to make the band, the outside piece of your hat, your cap, in the 2 pieces, a 2-part band, or you can actually use the lining as your outside piece as well. So cut 2 pieces of lining, one for the lining and one for the outside. And I have an example in one of the first videos. I'm not sure, I think it was the hat version of the Rosie, where I did an applique on the lining piece and used it on the outside of the hat. So there are some options here. I really like the way the 2-part band looks. You can play with the texture of the 2-part band when the 2 pieces are sewn together. They're slightly deeper than the lining piece, and I'll show you, you've got options now about how you manipulate that extra little bit to create a draping effect, or to create like a puffy effect for the band looking like it's got some stuffing underneath it and sewn on top. So here we have our top piece now. It's got the top stitching on the back seam. The seams are flat, and I'll just fold it in half and cut a notch to mark the center front on both edges. And now we are ready to put those 2 pieces together. So we are going to cut a center notch on the lower part of the band though first, so we have notches to match up for both pieces. And with the right sides together, I'm just going to manipulate them so that I can make a center seam joining those 2 pieces together. And having that lower band too means that you can mix up some fabrics, you can pick some colors, something that is fun, that has several colors, and then just pick one of those colors for your main fleece color, or you do 2 or 3 different colors of fleece. There's so many options. So I'm using my 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam width, and my magnetic seam guide to help me make a consistent seam width all the way around. I'm sewing around the circumference of the head now, putting those 2 pieces together. And as I said, the right sides are together. I'm looking at the back of the lower band, and I'll just keep going all the way around, easing those 2 pieces together and removing the clips as I go. And once I'm finished, it's going to look like that. And I have a band now for my cap, and I'm going to join the band with the visor. I've got the right sides together. The 2 plaid layers are facing each other. Started in the middle at the center notch on both, and I'm just sewing out to one edge and catching, see the raw edge of the tip of the visor. and just sewing off the edge there. And then I'll use my sharp scissors just to trim that little bit away, just to remove some bulk, because that's going to be inside the seam. And now before I sew the other half of the visor onto the other side of the band, I'm just going to wrap it around and try to figure out where those two parts should be, about equal spacing from the back seam. So just taking a look at the back seam of my cap, and you can use a ruler or just eyeball it, but try to space out those two tips of your visor as they wrap around your head so they're about the same distance away from the back seam. It's not completely important, but it's a nice touch. So I've just turned my piece over, and starting from that center point again, I'm just going to sew out to the other side, sewing the visor and the band, the lower edge of the band together, and just matching up the raw edges on the right side using my seam guide to help. I like this seam guide. It has a little rounded side, a short side that has a rounded edge, which is perfect for helping to keep a consistent seam width when sewing these curved visors. And I'll just manipulate that end point again so that I get rid of that open raw edge, and it'll be disappearing into the seam of the cap. And that's how it should look, folks. Starting to look like a cap. So now I'm doing the back seam of my lining. So this piece is going to go on the inside, and it'll be sewn to the other side of my visor. And once again, I am going to sew that seam down flat, a double stitch, a double row of sewing, one on each side of that ditch, the seam ditch, up one side, the width of my presser foot, pivot at the top, and come back down the other side. And that's how it'll look. And you can clean up the inside again if you want to just remove some bulk. Makes it easier to sew if it's all nice and flat. You don't have to worry about any of those raw edges getting sort of tucked up under your needle and presser foot as you sew over them when you are putting the rest of this cap together. So now we're ready to put the lining and the cap band and cap visor all together. But first we'll cut some center points. Folded in half, I have a center notch on each edge of my lining band. So we're looking at the underside of the cap now. If we turned it around, you would be at the underside of the visor. So I'm just going to put a couple of clips matching up the back seams. The right sides are together. And then I'll bring it around so that I can match up the center front notches as well. And then I'll just clip a couple of places on the sides just to make sure that my pieces are going to fit well, and they do. So that's good. We are going to ease them in, but they're perfect fit right now. And so once I have all those clips in place and I'm happy with the way those two pieces look like they're going to go together, I'm going to sew them together. And I will use my 3/8 of an inch seam width or 1 centimeter wide seam width and my magnetic seam guide, and all my raw edges are up against the seam guide, and I'm just going slowly matching up those raw edges together all on the right side up against my seam guide as I work my way around the bottom edge of my cap. Take your time as you go around, and sometimes I have to put my hand underneath just to make sure that my band lining is nice and flat too. But here I am at the end, and I'm just going to over sew rather than back stitch. I find that easier to do, especially when I'm going through lots of layers. And I'm back sort of at the starting point. I usually start towards the back because that way if I need to adjust something, I can always get at that back seams. But the pattern pieces should fit together very well, perfectly, but sometimes some fabrics are a little stretchier than others. And here we go. We are getting closer. So our raw edges from the 2 points of our visor are well hidden inside that seam. And so we have a really nice look on the front of our cap. and our seams look like they're all lined up nicely. So I'm just going to go around and I'm going to do an edge stitch to close off the top of my bands. So I've got the two band pieces together, the wrong sides are together. I'm looking at the good side on the outside, and I'll match up the center notch and the back seam, just put in some pins away from where I'm sewing. And once I do that, I'll go around and just close up that edge with an edge stitch. So we're attaching the bands to the rosy visor the way that we did in our first video about the rosy, but I'm going to show you an alternate way to finish off the bands, and it gives a completely different appearance on the outside. But I'll just finish this edge stitch, but you could do this step after what I'm going to show you next if it's easier to close off the top after you manipulate the seam that's in the middle of this band on the outside. So in the original rosy, that draping was intentional. It just sort of drapes over the band, gives a slouchy look, but you can change the look completely just by where you position that raw edge that's buried inside. You know, the seam where we joined the two pieces of the band together in the middle there, if we pushed the raw fabric, the raw edge, and you could clean it up with a serger before we put that band lining on, but I didn't because we're making a serge-free hat. But you can see how different it looks when you do that. It's almost like you made the visor separately and you just sewed it on to band and the top. Like it gives it a completely different look, and I like the look. It's got a 3D look. So you've got the slouchy look like that, where it's draping over the seam, or you can reverse it and have it so that the bottom edge is sort of covering up the edge of the sewing where it joins the top part of the band. And looks like it almost that you've filled it with fiberfill or something and made it all puffy. Two different looks. I really like this look though, and so I started making it this way for my customers. I've sold all of the rosy hats except for the ones I'm making this video. Customers really love this hat and they love this look. So I'm going to add it to the pattern instructions, but you have it here on the video too. So once you get the pieces, you can decide how you want to make that outside band appear. Slouchy with a drape over the bottom, or you can do it like this so it looks like the bottom is a little puffy and added maybe extra afterwards and fold it over and it looks like it's full of some stuffing that gives it that really nice puffy look. I love it anyway. I love this look. So I was just pinning so that I could try to keep those two pieces of the upper part of my band, the lining in the upper section of the band, both of those pieces that are the gray fleece, hold them together close to that center point, and that just helps me manipulate that raw edge down in towards the visor of the cap. And I also changed my presser foot, so I have a narrow foot here. I'm sewing very close to that lump, and that lump is all the raw edges of that seam that I made to join those two pieces of my outside band together. They're all folded over and pointed down towards the visor. So I'm just using that lump to sort of guide the edge of my narrow presser foot along. And you know, you don't need to change to a narrow presser foot. I did because I have one, but even if you use your wide presser foot, it's still going to look nice. Just going to match all the top stitching that is in this cap already. And I'll just work my way around slowly, just sort of flattening it out, and you can see that's what it looks like on the inside. And I'll just continue on, just using that bigger clump of fabric on the right side to guide my presser foot, and that's how it will look. And I'm very pleased with this. I'm pleased that there are options that you can choose how you want to finish the outside of this cap. I've just clipped those the back seam and the center front notch together because I'm going to cut myself two center side seams, one on each side, and that is going to help me ease in the top. I'll do the same thing to the top, but first we've got to do the dart for the top, which we will do now. Now, I am going to make my top as a single layer, but if you wanted to do some lining and cover the seam from the dart, you can just cut a piece of some sort of a lining material. I use the Cassia coat lining for my winter hats. It has a really nice weight, shiny side that helps with your hair, preventing hat head. But I'm not going to line this particular one that I'm making for this video, but I'll show you some with the lining in them afterwards. And so what we start at the bottom edge of the top, we folded it in half. We cut a notch on the edge that doesn't have the dart at the center front, and I'm just sewed a dart up into the center and just off of the fabric, following my seam guide and following the curve of that dart. And I'll just clip that dart open a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the edges of that seam, and I'm going to, you know what, top stitch on either side of the ditch of that seam, just to match the top stitching everywhere else. And underneath, the seam is open, it's flat, and I'm just catching the raw edges underneath my needle and my presser foot. Repeat on the other side, just going as far as your dart. A couple of back stitches there, and that's how it'll look. And I'll clean it up because this is going to be visible on the inside of the hat. So I'm going to clip away that extra fabric that is on either side or the outside edge of my 2 rows of sewing. Now, if you wanted to add lining, this is what one of the rosy caps looks like with the lining. And you can see I just reversed the process, did the same thing for both of the linings and put the wrong sides together, sewed them around with an edge stitch before adding them to the rest of the cap. So with my dart seam and my front notch in line, I'm going to just match up the sides and cut some center side notches. So my top is going to match my band now with 4 notching marks. Well, 3 notching marks and a seam to meet up and join together and help me ease in the top as I sew these 2 pieces together. And we're getting close to the end, folks. Yay! So I just worked my way around the cap, easing in the pieces and adding clips at those notch points. Just making sure that everything is going to work out, and it looks like the 2 pieces are a perfect fit. And I'm just going to now sew them together. So the right sides are together. I'm working on the wrong side of the back of the top, and I will start at the back, matching up the dart seam, the bottom of the dart seam, with the top of the back seam on the band. And I'm using my 3/8 of an inch wide seam width or my 1 centimeter wide seam width, matching up the raw edges on the right side up against the seam guide and the notching points as well. Once I finish, I will check my work, make sure that my seam depth is consistent. So we're getting close. Looking at the inside of the hat, it doesn't look so neat and tidy. You can see that the raw edges of that top seam that joins the top and the bands together wants to go in towards the center of the top. In the very first Rosie video, I showed you how to do a finishing edge up near the top of the hat, doing about a 1/4 inch or the width of your presser foot around and using that raw bulky seam on the left side to help guide your presser foot. And that gave us this kind of look here, which was a nice way to finish off the cap, especially if you had a serger, but we're not using a serger, so we're going to do this alternative way. I will leave that stitching in that I just put in. We'll have a double row there, but you only need to do one of them. So I'm going to change the foot again to a foot that has an edge guide. And this one is a 1/4 inch. So I think a lot of quilters have this as well in their toolbox. And I am going to position the foot so that the edge guide is just falling around in the ditch of my seam, and I will go slowly so that I can manipulate it so it stays there. And I'm going to push that raw seam towards the center of the top of the cap, catching it with my needle and thread underneath as I do as straight as possible, a nice neat top stitch working from the top of the hat. And I'm working on the good side, even though it looks way down there far in the depths of the hat. I'm working on the good side and just checking with my hand underneath every once in a while to make sure that my seam is tucked underneath and that my needle is catching it as I make my way around the top. And you can see there, that's what I mean. I'm catching it. So I'll just continue and finish till I get back to my starting point, and I will over sew. And then comes the finishing touches. But there you see the top is rounded nicely, but we're just going to give it a little bit more work. What we're going to do is just carry on trimming away that excess fabric that's on the edge there, carefully trimming away. We wouldn't want to cut through our hat now after all this work, but this is going to look really nice. It's going to have a nice professional finish, even though we didn't use the serger. We're just using our sharp scissors and cleaning up really nicely. And that's what I like about fleece, because it doesn't fray, it doesn't unravel. It's a little fuzzy, so it really makes a nice edge that is hardly noticeable, especially once you start to wear your cap. So I am going to take this back over to the cutting table now. I'm going to try it on my hat block, which is a 22.5-inch hat block, and it fits perfectly. So yay, we've got the size right. And if you're interested in having a hat business, you really need to get yourself a hat block. I get mine from Judith M. She's in the Chicago area. She has a website. She has all the sizes in half-inch increments. The 22.5 is the average woman, 23.5 is the average men. So get yourself at least those two sizes. And I'm using a pressing cloth as a go-between between my fleece and my iron. And I'm using some steam, just sort of melting or heating up the fleece just to shrink it a little bit, just to further round off the edges of my cap. Now, I know that a lot of you don't have a wooden hat block. And so my alternative that I use quite a bit is a Cricut hat pressing form, and this one comes in a kit, a hat press kit, but you can buy them separately now, and they are really inexpensive, or relatively inexpensive compared to the wooden hat blocks, and they are shapeable. You can use them on their side. It fits perfectly in my 22.5-inch head size hat here. And you can use it to apply appliques. I mean, it's really a really value-added tool. So I recommend you go over to the Cricut website and get yourself one. You can it has a handle underneath, so it makes it easy to hold on to while you are manipulating your steam iron. And don't forget to add a little thin piece of cotton, quilting cotton weight in between your steam iron and your fleece hat, just so you don't burn the fleece and you don't mat it down. You want it to stay nice and fluffy. But I also have a couple of these Cricut hat forms to give away. So let's have a contest. All I want you to do is just leave a comment below and I will enter you in the contest. Just tell me where you're from, where you're watching. If you have a question too, ask it and I will enter you in the contest. We'll give away a hat form at the end of March and one at the end of April 2026. And here you go. Here's my show and tell. This one has the nice velvet underneath and the velvet edge. The black one down on the cutting table, that one I made with the craft foam underneath and the black velvet edge. And of course, there's these beauties. Yes, I made the flowers with my scraps, and I show you how to do that in both the first rosy cap video and the rosy hat video. So I will link those on the page on our website where you can get the patterns and all the information you need, including links to the tools that I used today. Don't forget to leave a comment and enter the contest so I can send you a Cricut hat pressing form. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's call it a day so I can go play in the snow. Thank you to our video producers, our channel members for supporting the Madcap Hats channel. We We so appreciate you. We are on Facebook and Instagram. We're Madcap Hats there too, so follow us, like this video, subscribe to the channel, hype the video. I'm Tori Capes. I'm a certified milliner. These are all my original designs. You are free to use them for your small business and for your family and friends. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you really soon. Bye.